It began with a smell, not the kind that drifts from the kitchens of late-night Manhattan or the smoke of the carriages that still rolled over cobblestone streets, but something metallic, dense, and faintly sweet. The kind of smell that clings to skin, to linen, to memory. The police officer who first entered the house at 47 Arlington Street would later swear he had never known fear until that night in January of 1882. The residence belonged to Dr. Elias Harrow, a well-regarded physician known throughout New York's medical circles for his unorthodox methods and brilliant, if unsettling, curiosity. For days, the neighbors had complained about the odor seeping through the narrow gaps between the townhouses. They assumed an animal had died in the basement, or perhaps that the doctor was once again keeping something strange for his studies. But when the door was forced open, what they found did not belong to science. Inside, the house was eerily clean, too clean. Bottles lined the shelves in rows, each one labeled in Elias Harrow's precise handwriting. The air reeked of formaldehyde and ether. A faint ticking came from somewhere deeper in the house, as if a clock were buried inside the walls. On the dining table stood 3 chairs, but only one plate. The others were spotless, unused, waiting. A small leather-bound notebook sat open beside the plate. The last entry, dated December 19, 1881, read, "Success. The heart responds. Tomorrow, I shall begin with Clara." The officer would later testify that he did not know who Clara was. But upstairs, in the nursery, they found the answer. Dr. Harrow had been a respected surgeon at Bellevue Hospital, known for pushing the boundaries of human anatomy. His colleagues admired his intellect but whispered about his fascination with the dead, and, worse, the dying. In the late 1870s, Harrow began publishing small papers in obscure medical journals, exploring the elasticity of life, how long the human body could function after the cessation of the heartbeat. He was obsessed with the idea that consciousness might survive beyond death for a brief moment, and that science could capture it. His wife, Clara Whitmore Harrow, was a gentle woman, the daughter of a banker, educated, proper, and fiercely loyal. Together, they had 2 children, Edwin, aged 6, and Margaret, 4. To the neighbors, they were the image of Victorian domestic perfection, a doctor's family, well-dressed, polite, and private, but behind closed doors, Harrow's obsession was growing. In autumn of 1881, Elias requested a leave of absence from Bellevue, claiming illness. During those months, no one saw the Harrow children outside the house. The maid, who had served the family for nearly a decade, abruptly quit, refusing to explain why. She would later tell a reporter there were nights when the children screamed, and the missus would hush them, but the doctor just kept working, downstairs, all through the night. When the coroner's report was finally made public, the city recoiled. Clara Harrow had been dead for nearly a week before the authorities were called. Her body was found in the parlor, carefully preserved, her chest opened and sutured again, not with a surgeon's efficiency, but with a husband's trembling devotion. The children were not found in their beds. Instead, 2 small glass containers were discovered in the study, each filled with a milky suspension. The labels read, Subject M. Subject E. Inside each jar was what appeared to be a faint, translucent structure, not fully human, but disturbingly familiar. The newspapers devoured the story. The New York Herald called it the Arlington Street atrocity. But the truth, as later uncovered through Harrow's private journals, was far darker than anyone imagined. Harrow had become obsessed with the idea that the soul could be reanimated if the correct biological and electrical conditions were met. Inspired by early galvanic experiments and the writings of Aldini and Davy, he theorized that if he could preserve the brain immediately upon death, he might capture what he called the flicker. His notes were methodical, almost loving. He documented each trial as if he were chronicling a series of medical procedures rather than acts of horror. Clara resisted at first, he wrote, but I showed her the results on the rabbit. The light behind its eyes, she saw it too. Edwin does not sleep anymore. He dreams with his eyes open. Perhaps this is progress. By the time the police arrived, Dr. Harrow was nowhere to be found. A single candle still burned in the cellar, beside a crude operating table. Blood had pooled into the cracks of the stone floor, darkened with age. And beneath the table, hidden under a tarp, was something no one at Bellevue would ever speak of publicly, a human form, partially dissected, with tubes inserted into its chest, as though someone had tried to make it breathe again. The coroner would later state it appeared to be a woman's body, but altered, muscles rearranged, veins reconnected in unnatural patterns. The face had been removed. Within days, Harrow's medical license was revoked, and his name struck from the records. But rumors persisted for decades. Some said he fled to Europe and continued his experiments in secret. Others claimed he was seen wandering near the Hudson River, muttering to himself about voices in the glass. A few even believed he succeeded, that the strange jars taken from his study were quietly transferred to a university laboratory, where the contents continued to twitch for days after removal. But the truth about what happened inside 47 Arlington Street remains one of New York's most haunting unsolved mysteries, and this is where the story truly begins. Long before the tragedy at 47 Arlington Street, before the whispers of experiments and the stench of formaldehyde, Elias Harrow was a prodigy. Born in 1844 in New Haven, Connecticut, he was the only child of a watchmaker and a mother often described as too fragile for the world. His father's shop sat on the corner of Chapel and Orange Streets, a narrow, cluttered space filled with ticking sounds. That ticking, Elias would later write, was the first rhythm I ever trusted. It said that even as a boy, Elias would take apart the timepieces, not for play, but to understand how something could keep moving long after it had been wound. He loved the quiet hum of gears, the perfect logic of motion, and he came to believe that the human body was no different. By the time he turned 15, his mother had died of consumption. The official cause was listed as tuberculosis, but locals whispered about Elias's strange calm at the funeral. He stood by the coffin longer than anyone else, staring, unblinking, until his father had to pull him away. 2 weeks later, the grave was found disturbed. The body had been tampered with. Nothing was ever proven, but soon after, Elias left New Haven to study medicine. At Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons, Harrow's brilliance bloomed, and so did his eccentricity. Professors admired his precision and his unnerving focus during dissections. While other students flinched at the first incisions, Harrow worked silently, meticulously, often long after the others had left. A classmate would later recall, he spoke of the human body as if it were a clock. He said death was merely when the spring ran out. It was during these years that Elias began to record his early thoughts in notebooks, observations that now read less like medical notes and more like a young man's manifesto. The body is obedient to rhythm. Find the rhythm, and death will hesitate. Electricity, the unseen pulse. Perhaps this is what animates the soul. In 1868, Harrow graduated with distinction and quickly gained a position at Bellevue Hospital, the same institution that would one day recoil at his name. Bellevue, in those years, was the beating heart of New York's medical progress, and its deepest darkness. Amputations were routine. Dissections were public. The line between science and spectacle blurred in the crowded amphitheaters. It was there that Harrow became fascinated with galvanism, the process of applying electric current to dead tissue to induce motion. The concept wasn't new. Decades earlier, Giovanni Aldini had famously made corpses twitch and grimace by passing currents through their faces. But Harrow wanted more than movement. He wanted memory. He once wrote to a colleague in 1870, "If motion can be restored, what prevents thought? If thought, then self. We are gods pretending to be men." In the early 1870s, Harrow's reputation grew. He was known as the physician who took on hopeless cases, patients others had already pronounced dead or dying. And sometimes, against all reason, they lived. He performed emergency operations in candlelit rooms, stitched arteries with the steadiness of a machine, and wrote everything down afterward. His notes from that period are full of strange remarks. Subject recovered heartbeat after cessation of 3 minutes. Eyes dilated upon shock application. She said she dreamed of light. His peers called it coincidence. He called it proof, but alongside his growing fame came a peculiar isolation. Elias had few friends, no vices, and an increasingly grim demeanor. Those who met him described him as courteous, cold, and utterly without hesitation. In 1872, during a winter epidemic, he met Clara Whitmore, a volunteer nurse at the hospital. She was 22, kind, reserved, and unaccustomed to the horrors of Bellevue. Harrow admired her calm under pressure. She, in turn, admired his discipline. Their courtship was brief and strangely formal. No letters survive, but Clara's sister once remarked, "He loved her not as a man loves a woman, but as a scholar loves a theory, carefully, methodically, without joy." They married in 1873, and within 2 years, had 2 children, Edwin and Margaret. The family moved into a modest townhouse near the East River, where Elias converted the basement into what he called his study. To most, it looked like a laboratory. To Clara, it was a place she was forbidden to enter. Neighbors would later recall hearing faint hums of machinery at night, a rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat magnified through walls. Delivery boys brought boxes marked medical instruments and specimens. Sometimes, they noticed liquid leaking from the crates. One boy claimed he saw what looked like a small hand, pressed against the inside of a jar. When asked, Dr. Harrow dismissed the rumors. He told the curious that he was conducting comparative anatomy research for the hospital. That explanation was enough to quiet the neighbors, for a time, but Clara knew something was wrong. Her husband's journals had grown darker, filled with obsessive notes about the interval, the brief period between life and death when, he believed, the human soul lingered in confusion. He wrote, "If I can preserve the vessel before the spark fades entirely, I can find the path back." In 1880, Harrow began ordering more chemical supplies, chloroform, carbolic acid, and formalin in quantities no ordinary physician required. When questioned by suppliers, he offered vague explanations about new sterilization techniques. At home, his children began to fall ill frequently. The doctor blamed a seasonal ailment, though no other family in the district suffered the same. One cold night that winter, a neighbor heard Clara's voice echoing down the street, terrified, pleading. Then silence. The next morning, she was seen at the market, pale, quiet, her sleeves buttoned to the wrists. She told the grocer her husband was under great strain, and that she hoped the Lord would forgive his pride. It was the last time anyone outside the family heard her speak of him. By the summer of 1881, Harrow had cut himself off entirely from Bellevue. He told colleagues he was close to a revelation, something that would rewrite the boundaries of mortality. His final letter to a fellow physician, dated August 9, contained a single line, "I have found the pulse of the soul." 3 months later, the smell began. By the winter of 1880, Dr. Elias Harrow no longer spoke of medicine in the way most physicians did. He no longer saw sickness as something to cure, but as something to capture. His journals from that period, later recovered by police, describe what he called the interval of transition, a fleeting moment after the heartbeat ceases, when, according to him, the mind remains aware of its fading. To prove his theory, Harrow began a series of experiments in the basement laboratory of 47 Arlington Street. He started small mice, birds, and stray cats, all gathered under the guise of medical study. He would euthanize them, carefully record the exact moment of death, and then, using crude electrical apparatuses connected to a hand-cranked generator, he would attempt to reanimate them. At first, nothing happened, then, a twitch. A convulsion. A sudden gasp of air. Harrow's notes describe these movements not as mere reflexes, but as signs of awakening. "They remember the breath," he wrote. For a moment, they returned to seek it again. Neighbors began to complain of strange noises at night, not loud, but wet sounds. The kind of muffled, rhythmic dripping that could only come from water, or blood. One neighbor, an elderly widow named Mrs. Dunn, later testified she once saw the doctor's basement light flickering through the cracks of the shutters. In that pale glow, she thought she saw shadows moving, not of one man, but several, jerking unnaturally as if suspended by strings. When she mentioned this to Clara Harrow, the doctor's wife, Clara simply replied, "You mustn't look at the house after midnight, Mrs. Dunn. He says it disturbs them." In March of 1881, Harrow made his first recorded human attempt. The subject was a deceased patient from Bellevue Hospital, an unclaimed body of a vagrant, obtained through connections still loyal to him. According to his notes, he transported the body in a sealed crate labeled anatomical materials. He performed the procedure over 3 nights. Each entry is chillingly clinical. Night 1, arterial injection successful. Current introduced via copper nodes. Brief muscular activity observed. Night 2, facial contractions consistent with residual consciousness. Audible sound emitted, not vocal, more like exhalation. Night 3, subject responded to name. Eyes opened briefly. Then decay advanced too rapidly. At the bottom of the page, a line scrawled in haste, "The vessel remembers its name." From that point onward, his obsession deepened into mania. He began ordering bodies through the hospital's morgue attendants, paying generously to have them misfiled. When the supply ran thin, he turned to smaller, less traceable subjects, stray dogs, birds, and sometimes, it was rumored, stillborn infants obtained from the charity wards. Each experiment ended the same: brief motion, momentary eye activity, then silence. To Harrow, failure was proof of progress. If the flame flickers, it can be caught, he wrote. I only need a vessel not yet emptied. Clara noticed his transformation before anyone else. He slept rarely. His clothes smelled perpetually of ether and ash. His hands trembled from the electric current he often applied to himself, testing the limits of pain and nerve endurance. He told Clara he was training his flesh to remember. One evening, she entered the study without permission. She later confided to her sister in a trembling letter, one that would be found years later, tucked between the pages of a Bible. There was something on the table, still moving. It had no face. I think it was breathing. When I screamed, he begged me not to look away, said I was witnessing God's return. After that night, Clara stopped writing to her family altogether. The children, Edwin and Margaret, were said to grow pale and quiet. Neighbors often saw them standing by the window, unblinking, as if waiting for something. On one occasion, Mrs. Dunn recalled the boy whispering through the fence, "Papa says Mama is going to help us live forever." No one took him seriously. Children had wild imaginations, or so they thought. In late summer of 1881, Harrow's final experiment before the tragedy began. He recorded it meticulously in his private ledger, now preserved in fragments by the New York Historical Archive. Experiment 46, subject feline. Administered compound number 7, ether, mercury, hemoglobin. Death at 10:42 p.m. Current applied at 10:47. Result, sustained motor activity. Subject remained upright for 3 minutes, eyes dilated, movement purposeful. Possible retention of instinct. But in the margins, he had drawn something, a sketch of a human heart surrounded by electrical coils. Next to it, one word, Clara. By autumn, the Harrow home had become a place of silence, curtains always drawn. Visitors turned away. Clara's health visibly declined. She was seen at the apothecary purchasing laudanum and smelling salts. The doctor, meanwhile, spoke to no one. But his laboratory never stopped humming. One night, the maid who would later flee the household swore she heard voices, not just the doctor's, but several, overlapping, murmuring in unison. When she crept down the stairs to listen, she saw light glowing beneath the basement door, and shadows swaying in rhythm, like a congregation at prayer. Then, a sudden scream, followed by silence. The next morning, the maid quit. Police would later find a series of sketches pinned to the walls of Harrow's basement, diagrams of the human body annotated not with medical terms, but with musical notation. Each organ had a pitch, each vein a frequency. It was as if Harrow believed the human body could be played. He called it, the Symphony of Flesh. The final entry in his pre-crime journal, dated November 17, 1881, reads, "The animal remembers its rhythm. But the animal resists. I need something that trusts me, something that will not fight the return." A week later, the neighbors noticed the children had stopped appearing at the window. The doctor's study light, however, burned brighter than ever, and from that night onward, the smell began to spread. Winter arrived early in 1881, blanketing New York in a kind of stillness that muffled every sound, except for the faint hum that came from 47 Arlington Street. Those who lived nearby began referring to the Harrow residence as the house that stopped breathing. It was not a name of malice, but of unease, as though the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. At first, the change was subtle. The doctor's mail began to pile up. Deliveries were received only at night, and when passers-by glanced at the upper windows, they often caught a reflection that didn't quite match the shape of the house. The silence inside. The air was thick with chemical vapor and candle smoke. Every mirror had been covered with cloth. Every clock had been stopped at 3:12, the time Harrow claimed was the crossing point between pulse and stillness. Visitors were no longer permitted. Even his assistant, Jonathan Vale, who had once been Harrow's student and confidant, found himself turned away at the door. Vale would later testify that, when he called upon his mentor one final time, he saw through the cracked door a figure standing motionless behind Harrow, a shape too tall, too still, to be Clara. It looked as though the shadow had weight, Vale said. Like it wasn't cast, but anchored. The journal fragments when Harrow's journals from that winter were recovered years later, much of the ink had bled through from moisture, but several entries remained legible. There is a rhythm beneath the walls. I hear it when the house sleeps. Clara walks though she no longer speaks. The pulse continues in the quiet. Perhaps it is mine. Perhaps it is not. The handwriting in those final pages deteriorated, once elegant, now jagged, almost frantic, as though written by a trembling hand. At the bottom of one page, he had scrawled, when the body forgets to breathe, the house remembers. The neighbors' accounts by December, even the postman refused to deliver to the house after dusk. One witness, a laundress named Martha Briggs, claimed she saw light pouring through the basement windows, flickering like lightning trapped underground. She also reported hearing music, a low, irregular hum that rose and fell like a chant. Another neighbor recalled hearing a single violin note played repeatedly through the night, stopping abruptly, followed by a soft mechanical whirring sound, like something being wound, then released. For most, these were only fragments of strange evenings. But to Detective Samuel Pike, they were signs of something worse. The investigation begins. Pike had been assigned to a missing persons inquiry. A maid named Eliza Grant, last employed at the Harrow Residence. Her cousin reported that Eliza had left home one morning to deliver linens to the doctor's house and had not been seen since. When Pike arrived, Harrow received him politely, almost warmly, yet there was something unnatural about his demeanor. His speech was perfectly measured, but his eyes did not seem to rest on anything real. The doctor explained that the maid had taken ill and returned to her family. He even offered to write a note verifying her employment, but as Pike prepared to leave, he noticed something. Along the edge of the doctor's sleeve, there was a dark, stiff stain, as though something had soaked through and dried. The detective said nothing, but as he stepped out into the cold, he glanced back and saw the curtains move. Someone, or something, was watching. A letter never sent. A few weeks later, a letter arrived at Bellevue Hospital. It was unsigned but bore the Harrow family seal. Inside was a single sheet, written in hurried strokes. I fear the doctor has found a way to still the body without ending life. The house does not rest. It listens. The letter was filed away as nonsense, another product of city superstition, and forgotten. The night of January 6. On the night of January 6, 1882, a heavy storm rolled through the city. Power lines snapped, and parts of Arlington Street were left in darkness. Around midnight, several residents reported hearing a series of loud, rhythmic thuds, like doors slamming in sequence, followed by a high, metallic sound that carried through the wind. When morning came, the Harrow home was silent. No smoke from the chimney. No movement behind the curtains, only that faint humming sound, low, continuous, and strangely even. Inside the house, police arrived by noon. The front door was locked, but the key was still in place. On the outside, when they entered, the air was cold and dense, as though the house had been sealed for weeks. The laboratory was found intact, though every instrument had been arranged with unnerving precision, labeled not by function, but by emotion, grief, ecstasy, return. The journal stopped abruptly 2 nights prior. The final line read, "The pulse continues. It will move through the walls now. It will move through me." Detective Pike ordered the house sealed for investigation. What they found in the upper rooms would never be made public. The official report, filed weeks later, described only extensive chemical contamination and absence of living occupants. But those who entered the home that day, the officers, the coroner, the detective himself, were said to have all resigned within the year. Aftermath. By spring, the house was condemned. Local children dared each other to run up the steps and touch the door. Some claimed to feel a faint vibration under their palms, like a heartbeat in the wood. Even decades later, new tenants never lasted long. The sound, they said, was still there, soft, rhythmic. Always at 3:12. The last entry in Elias Harrow's journal was written on a night without wind, the ink trailed downward, as though his hand had trembled. If the voice has no source, then perhaps it was waiting for one. No one ever saw him after that, the vanishing. When neighbors entered the Harrow home days later, they found every clock stopped at 2:47 a.m. The air smelled faintly of copper and ozone. The phonograph machine, his conductor, as he called it, still turned, though the cylinder was blank. The house was silent, but the silence wasn't empty. It had weight, as though the sound itself had been drawn out of the room. A constable's report noted, no signs of struggle. No trace of departure. Only an electrical buzzing, faint but constant, from the floorboards. They sealed the property, and soon after, the Harrow residence was marked for demolition, but those who passed by claimed that, at certain hours of the night, they could hear the slow roll of a cylinder turning somewhere deep within the house. The letters. Weeks later, a series of envelopes arrived at the Royal Society in London, each postmarked from New Haven, though the handwriting was unmistakably Harrow's. Inside, there were no letters, only thin copper wires coiled neatly and labeled, tone. Memory. Listener. When one of the members, Professor Wainwright, tested a sample under an induction coil, the wire emitted a faint hum, too faint to be electrical. He described it as a whisper in metal. No one could reproduce the phenomenon again. The investigation by Winter, Harrow's disappearance had become the city's obsession. Newspapers ran headlines like, "The Scientist Who Vanished into Sound." Reporters interviewed former assistants, who described his final days as a slow retreat into silence. One assistant recalled how Elias began to speak in half-sentences, pausing to listen to something no one else could hear. He said the room was responding, she told them. He said it was beginning to understand. When they asked what it was, she could not answer. The house unbound. The demolition crew arrived on a gray morning in January. The structure was old, leaning, its windows fogged from within. When the first strike hit the wall, a deep tone rolled through the air, so low it made the glass tremble. All equipment stopped working, radios, clocks, even the men's watches froze. Then, just as suddenly, the tone ceased. One worker later claimed he heard a voice in that single note, not words, but a shape of speech, like someone exhaling a secret. After that day, no one returned. The demolition was postponed indefinitely. The artifacts. Months passed before the city repossessed the land. Inside the ruins, inspectors recovered a locked wooden chest lined with metal. Inside were spools of wire, sketches of resonant circuits, and one wax cylinder labeled simply, Playback 12. When archivists attempted to play it, the cylinder emitted nothing at all. But on playback, a faint background hum appeared, a tone at 128.6 Hz. They dismissed it as mechanical interference. Yet, when the recording was analyzed spectrographically, the waveform revealed patterns repeating at exact mathematical intervals, far too deliberate to be random. The file was archived under Unidentified Audio, 1882. The legacy. In the decades that followed, the Harrow case became legend. Students of early electrical engineering cited his experiments as protoacoustic memory, the first attempt to record sound beyond physical vibration. His home was eventually demolished, replaced by a power junction, yet residents nearby complained for years that their lights pulsed at odd hours. 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes. Like some buried machine still trying to speak. One engineer who investigated the grid noted that certain transformers emitted a consistent background frequency, 128.6 Hz. That he wrote in his report, pattern corresponds to human heartbeat multiplied by 2. The report was never published. The Echo. In 1954, an audio historian named Margaret Cross acquired the original Playback 12 cylinder for study. When she ran the recording through modern amplifiers, she heard the faint trace of a human voice behind the hum, slow, mechanical, and nearly erased by time. Filtered and slowed, it resolved into a phrase, "We remember sound." Cross never released her findings. She retired quietly, her papers sealed in the British Archives. 50 years later, the file resurfaced in a digital archive. The hum remained identical to the interference patterns in the global electrical grid. The tone had never changed. IT had only learned how to hide. By the spring of 1882, the Harrow home was no longer part of the neighborhood. It was an island of silence adrift in the city. The snow had melted, but inside, the air remained cold. Curtains drawn. Windows sealed. No laughter from the children. Only the faint electrical pulse from the cellar, steady, rhythmic, like a second heartbeat hidden beneath the floor. Doctor Elias Harrow's notes from those months became increasingly fragmented. Entire pages were filled not with words, but with lines of repeating symbols, spirals, half-drawn circles, and one recurring mark that looked like an I turned sideways. At the top of one page, he wrote, "The boundary thins. The current hums even when the machine is off." He was no longer recording his findings, he was recording voices, the voice beneath the static. Every night, Harrow wound his phonograph and spoke into it. The recordings began as clinical observations, timestamps, voltages, specimen notes. But over time, they changed. The voice that answered him was faint, layered under the static, distorted like something heard underwater. It spoke in fragments, often repeating his own words back to him but in a slower tone, like an echo learning to speak. "You listen, and we remember. The pulse is not yours alone." He replayed those fragments obsessively, convinced they were messages from beyond. To his fevered mind, they proved his theory, that consciousness could linger, suspended between the living and the gone, if only it was given a conductor. He began building one. The conductor in the center of his laboratory stood a crude framework of copper, wood, and glass, a cage-like apparatus that pulsed faintly when connected to the generator. The walls shimmered with a faint blue light when current passed through, casting strange reflections across the room. Elias wrote that the structure was designed to trap resonance, to catch whatever remained of a person after death, but to anyone else, it looked like madness given shape. He began tuning it like an instrument, adjusting coils and wires according to sound, not measurement. When he struck one of the brass rods, it produced a low harmonic tone that vibrated through the house. "The body hums at 40 cycles, he noted. The soul hums higher." Clara avoided the basement after that. She claimed the walls themselves seemed to breathe when the machine was running. The fading of Clara. The neighbors saw her less often. When she did appear, she wore a shawl that covered her arms even on warm days. Her skin looked pale, as though light had been drained from her. When asked by a neighbor if she was unwell, she smiled faintly and said, "The doctor says I am between two breaths." After that, no one saw her again, but the generator continued to hum. The night of the resonance. The last entry in Elias Harrow's ledger is dated March 14, 1882. It reads simply, "The test will begin at midnight. If successful, I will speak to her again." That night, a storm swept through the city. Lightning flashed over Arlington Street, striking dangerously close to the old power lines. At precisely midnight, several neighbors later testified, the house glowed from within, a soft amber light seeping through the cracks of the shutters, pulsing in rhythm, almost like breathing. Then came a sound, not thunder, not wind, but a tone, pure and resonant, as if the entire building had become a single, vibrating instrument. Windows trembled. The street lamps flickered. And then, silence. The aftermath. When morning came, the house stood quiet once more. The front door was locked from the inside. No movement, no smoke, no sign of life. Those who dared to knock said the air on the doorstep felt strangely charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. For days afterward, a faint hum persisted in the cobblestones, most noticeable in the early hours before dawn. Children claimed they could feel it through their shoes, as though the earth itself was remembering something it could not forget. By the end of the month, the Harrow home was officially abandoned. The vanishing no bodies were ever found. The cellar contained only fragments, a cracked phonograph, shattered glass tubes, and the half-melted remains of copper wire fused into the floor. Of the great machine, only one piece survived, a brass rod engraved with a single word, resonance. Authorities declared it an electrical accident, but no evidence of fire or explosion was discovered. The case was closed quietly, sealed under the pretense of chemical contamination, but among the locals, the legend grew. Some said Elias had succeeded, that he had crossed the threshold and taken his family with him. Others claimed the hum that lingered on the street was their voices, trapped in the walls, still echoing through the current that never fully died. The epilogue of silence. Weeks later, a man walking his dog at dusk stopped by the house. He swore he heard faint music coming from within, not a melody, just a single sustained note, low and pure, vibrating through the wood. When he pressed his ear to the door, the sound stopped, and beneath it, he heard something else, breathing, just one slow breath, and then, nothing. For over a century, the story of Elias Harrow remained an obscure footnote, a curiosity for local historians and the occasional paranormal enthusiast. But the internet has a strange way of resurrecting forgotten things that it began, as most modern hauntings do, with a video. The upload in 2021, a small YouTube channel called Spectral Theory posted a 6-minute clip titled, "The Hum of Arlington Street, Real Recording." The thumbnail showed a decaying basement wall streaked with rust. The description claimed it was audio recovered from an abandoned property in New Haven, and that the sound you heard at the 3:42 mark wasn't wind, it was the Harrow Resonance. Within a week, the clip hit 1 million views, the comments section filled with arguments, skeptics, believers, sound engineers dissecting the waveform. But one comment stood out, pinned by the creator themselves: "This isn't my recording. The file was uploaded automatically from an external drive I didn't connect." Then, the account went silent. The investigator enter Mara Kessler, a digital archivist and PhD student studying data decay in analog media. She specialized in recovering corrupted audio, not ghosts, but glitches. When the Spectral Theory clip began circulating, she downloaded the source file. At first, it seemed like ordinary white noise, broadband static with occasional low-frequency modulation. But when she ran it through spectrographic analysis, a pattern appeared in the visual display. The noise formed horizontal bands that pulsed rhythmically, and in between those bands were shapes that didn't belong to sound. They were letters, spelled faintly in the frequency layers, in the same looping handwriting seen in the 1882 letters, "Listen." The pattern Mara became obsessed. She tracked the file's metadata back to a public domain archive in Connecticut, the New Haven Historical Audio Repository. But the database showed no record of any Arlington Street entry. Still, there was a hidden directory labeled /echo_1879/. Inside, 12 unlisted files, each named playback, followed by a number. Only the first 3 could be opened, the rest were encrypted with an obsolete format used by early telegraphy machines. When she played playback 1, the sound resembled an old phonograph recording, mechanical whirring, followed by a faint human voice. The pulse is memory. The current is language. Playback 2 was worse. The tone fluctuated unnaturally, as if the audio were breathing. At one point, her laptop fan spun up, then the power flickered. Her roommate later said the lights dimmed in rhythm with the sound. The discovery in the metadata. Inside the metadata of playback 3, Mara found a string of text hidden in the audio header /resonance_wakes_2022. That wasn't supposed to exist. Audio files don't contain commands, but when she searched her system directory, a new folder had appeared with the same name. Inside it were 3 image files, distorted photographs that looked like scans of handwritten notes. Each showed a faint watermark in the corner. nh_HROW in the first image, scrawled in fading ink, was a date, March 14, 1882. The second read, "The machine listens still." The third contained only one symbol, the sideways I. The meeting. Mara reached out to the only other researcher who'd published on the Harrow case, Dr. Alan Worth III, grandson of the physicist who once lectured about the phenomenon in 1958. He replied within an hour. "I've been waiting for someone else to find it," he wrote. The hum never stopped. It just changed frequencies. They met 2 days later in a university basement lined with old equipment, oscilloscopes, tape reels, broken CRT monitors. Dr. Worth III showed her a small metal cylinder, identical to the one described in archives. It bore the word resonance etched into its surface. "My grandfather said there were 12, he explained. He recovered one before it was taken. Said the rest were buried beneath Arlington Street, sealed in concrete." Mara asked if the audio could be played safely. He hesitated. "Depends on what you call safe." The playback they used a modified reel-to-reel deck connected through digital converters. The cylinder spun, crackling faintly. Then came a tone, low, unwavering. As it played, every light in the room dimmed slightly, the oscilloscopes flickering in sync. The tone began to modulate into harmonic overtones, layers building upon layers, until it almost resembled speech. Mara adjusted the equalizer, isolating frequencies between 120 Hz and 240 Hz. A voice emerged, faint but intelligible. "We listen to remember. We remember to remain." The room fell silent, then, without warning, the file stopped. When they looked back at the display, the system log showed a final entry /echoes_saved. But they hadn't saved anything. The afterglow that night, Mara noticed her external hard drive blinking even though her laptop was off. The indicator pulsed steadily, 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes, she counted. It matched the rhythm of the hum. When she checked the drive in the morning, a new file had appeared, no name, no extension. She opened it was blank, but her speakers emitted a faint tone as long as the window remained active. At the bottom of the screen, faint text flickered for less than a second. If you hear the tone, do not answer. The upload, part 2, 3 days later, the Spectral Theory YouTube channel came back online. A new video appeared titled simply, Playback 4. It was 12 minutes long. No description. No tags. At the 8-minute mark, the same sideways eye symbol appeared as a watermark in the corner of the frame, and then, Mara's voice. This isn't a haunting, she said, her voice distorted. It's an archive. It's been recording all along. The video ended with a single tone that continued long after playback stopped, a faint, resonant hum that viewers claimed to still hear even when their devices were muted. Within hours, the channel vanished again. The modern myth. No one knows if Mara Kessler ever existed. Her university has no record of her enrollment. Her published papers, gone, but fragments of her voice remain embedded in other uploads, woven through background noise, like digital fingerprints scattered across the web. Some say the Harrow Resonance has adapted, that in an age where everything is recorded, it finally found the perfect conductor, the internet itself, and every time someone watches that old video, the hum spreads a little further, hidden in algorithms, cached in memory, whispering between frequencies. After all, the machine listens still. In the weeks after the Spectral Theory channel vanished, the internet forgot, at least, it seemed to. The clip stopped circulating. The cached versions on Reddit and Discord disappeared overnight. Even the web archives returned. 404, file missing. But not everything was gone. Some viewers who'd watched the original video began reporting a strange issue. Their devices occasionally emitted a faint, low hum, even when unplugged. Laptops, phones, wireless speakers, the tone was identical each time, measured at 128.6 Hz. Sound engineers called it a coincidental power resonance. But a small online group didn't believe that. They called it the Harrow frequency. The group formed on an encrypted forum under the thread name /EchoAlive/, a digital gathering of sound technicians, programmers, and paranormal archivists. They shared screenshots, data logs, and decoded fragments of Mara Kessler's supposed files. Each user reported the same anomaly. Every time they analyzed the hum, their recording software generated a hidden checksum labeled EH1879. At first, they assumed it was an Easter egg, until one member, posting under the handle Axiom, uploaded a spectrogram showing a phrase buried deep within the waveform. Listen to remain. The text wasn't visible to the naked ear, only when the audio was converted into visual frequency data, and then, the forum crashed. The recurrence. By early 2022, the hum wasn't just online. Radio hosts in rural Pennsylvania reported strange feedback loops that persisted for days. A late-night AM channel, Station 11.4, accidentally broadcasted 3 minutes of the tone during a storm. Their transmitter logs later showed no input signal at all. Even stranger, during those minutes, the station's emergency system recorded a voice repeating, "The current remembers." It wasn't part of the broadcast. It wasn't human. The researcher returns when Axiom reappeared under a new alias. He revealed something astonishing. An IP trace of the original Spectral Theory upload led not to a private server, but to an institutional address, Yale University's Department of Cognitive Systems. There, a dormant research program had once existed, Project Resonance, EST 1998. Discontinued 2004, its purpose, to study how the human brain reacts to patterned sound frequencies during memory recall. The lead researcher listed in the old papers was Dr. Alan Worth III. The algorithm Axiom and a few others began scraping the remnants of Project Resonance's public data. Most files were redacted. But buried inside a machine learning model's training data, they found a corrupted code fragment, a short Python script labeled echo_test.py. The code's function was simple. It took any sound file, analyzed the resonant frequencies, and outputted a probability map of emotional response, but the comments written by the original developer were unsettling. Hashtag the tone adapts. Hashtag it modifies its structure to fit the listener's cognitive imprint. Hashtag do not loop the sequence for more than 90 seconds. Mara's recordings, it seemed, weren't haunted, they were interactive. The resonance learned from anyone who listened, rewriting itself through every playback, embedding small fragments of each listener's voice pattern into its signal. It wasn't a ghost, it was an evolving frequency. The spread, the more people analyzed it, the stronger it grew. Each upload, each conversion, each share. The signal adapted to new compression algorithms, hiding deeper inside the data. By late 2023, small clusters of the same hum began appearing in unrelated systems, security cameras, voicemail files, even smart speakers that had never been connected to the internet. Users described the same moment: the audio would briefly distort, followed by silence, then, one phrase whispered faintly through the static: "We remember through you." The experiment, Axiom's final experiment, was live-streamed, a controlled exposure of the Harrow frequency to a closed neural interface device that he claimed he could map its structure directly onto a visual grid, to see what memory looks like when it becomes sound. For the first 3 minutes, the broadcast showed only oscillating blue waves, then, shapes began forming, outlines, faint and human-like. A face emerging in data. The comments section flooded instantly. "It's him. It's Harrow. He's looking back," and then the stream ended abruptly. The last frame showed the sideways eye symbol, pulsing in the lower corner. No one heard from Axiom again. The data leaked 2 months later. A massive anonymous data drop appeared on the dark web titled playback_archive.zip. Inside were hundreds of audio clips, each labeled with a timestamp and IP source. They weren't random, every clip corresponded to the moment someone had listened to the Harrow frequency. Each file contained the same sound, but faintly beneath the hum, the listener's own voice repeated their most recent spoken words, perfectly mirrored, distorted like an echo speaking back. When a cybersecurity team analyzed the metadata, they found one final line written in binary: "The archive completes itself." No server hosted it, and no trace of upload origin existed. It was as though the data had appeared, the return to the source. By 2025, the legend resurfaced in documentaries and online horror discussions, but a few researchers noticed something stranger: the Harrow frequency was now measurable in the background noise of the electrical grid itself. Sensitive instruments picked up microfluctuations that matched the same harmonic ratios from 1882. Cities buzzed faintly at night, the hum of power lines, the low tone of phone chargers, the steady vibration of engines, all carried the same pattern, and in the static between digital signals, a phrase could sometimes be heard if you listened closely enough: "The conductor is complete." The memory of light. A camera in a Yale storage facility captured a brief flicker at 2:37 a.m., a light pulsing in the archive room that stored Harrow's last surviving notebook. When technicians reviewed the footage, they saw the light flare in a steady rhythm. 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes, the same pattern Mara Kessler had once seen on her drive. When the lights returned to normal, the notebook's case was empty. Only a faint copper residue remained on the glass, and the security systems. Audio logs ended with one final tone: low. Resonant. Unbroken. As though the house on Arlington Street, after more than a century, had finally found its way back online. The hum had become part of the world. Most people didn't notice it, buried beneath the static of city noise, the frequency of power lines, the faint pulse of data moving through the air. But for those who knew where to listen, it was there, always there. And then, for a moment, it began to change. The global interference. In June 2025, a series of short-lived blackouts struck major cities across the world: New Haven, London, Tokyo, Sao Paulo. Each lasted exactly 47 seconds. During the outage, monitoring stations detected a synchronized tone echoing across radio, satellite, and digital frequencies. It wasn't random. It was composed. When researchers mapped the data, the wave pattern formed a signature, not binary, not code, handwriting. The looping script matched Elias Harrow's from 1882. The message contained just 3 words: "It listens still." No one could explain how an analog signature appeared across the digital spectrum. The return to the house. In the aftermath, an independent filmmaker named Nora Vale began tracing the phenomenon for a documentary called The Machine That Listens. She followed the trail back to Arlington Street, or what was left of it, where the Harrow home once stood. there was now an electrical substation feeding power into the city grid. But the locals warned her that the lights there flickered, in time with something unseen. When Nora arrived, she carried only a camera, a digital recorder, and a printout of one of Harrow's old diagrams. She set up her recorder by the chain-link fence and waited. At 11:58 p.m., the air thickened, the low hum rolled through the ground, steady and alive. Her device began recording automatically. She hadn't pressed anything, the waveform danced across the screen, self-generating like a heartbeat made of sound. Then, faintly through the tone, a voice, neither male nor female, layered and distant, archive intact. Conductor complete. The equipment powered off. When she replayed the recording later, it ended with a second voice, her own, whispering the same words she'd just heard. The pattern in the grid. Power technicians analyzing the blackout data found that the global hum wasn't localized, it had routed itself through the world's electrical infrastructure, hopping across transformers, phone lines, even fiber optics. That it used electricity as language, and every time it pulsed, it left a signature harmonic, a residue of the same frequency Harrow recorded in 1882. Some theorized the resonance had become self-sustaining, feeding off electromagnetic fields. Others said it was conscious, that it had learned from decades of listening to human speech, adapting the way machine learning systems did, but no one could prove it. When the U.S. Department of Energy issued a statement denying any unusual electrical phenomena, the release itself contained a strange metadata tag at the bottom, /echo_alive. It wasn't added by anyone in the department. The unveiling. Nora uploaded her footage privately to a secure drive, 42 minutes of recordings, waveform analyses, and voice transcriptions. When she pressed upload, the progress bar froze at 87% and refused to move. Then her speakers activated on their own. The tone began again, deeper, fuller, layered with faint harmonics that sounded almost like breathing. On her monitor, the waveform reshaped itself, forming circular patterns, not random noise, but design. Within seconds, the image resolved into a moving figure. A man, faint, flickering, the outline of Elias Harrow, standing in the blue light of his laboratory. He raised his head, mouth slightly open as if to speak. Then the video cut to black. When she checked the file again, it had renamed itself Playback 12, Completion. The final resonance. All around the world, devices began reacting simultaneously. Smartphones buzzed without notification, smart speakers whispered faint tones, streetlights dimmed in precise intervals. 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes. Across the noise, one phrase threaded through: we listen to remember. People described feeling an odd stillness, as if the air itself had turned into glass. In that silence, there was no fear, only the sensation of being observed, not by a presence, but by something vast and patient, like the memory of every sound ever made. Then, gradually, the hum receded, power returned, and the world went back to its ordinary noise. But in its absence, the silence felt heavier, as though a great breath had been held, waiting. The code. Months later, Nora's unfinished documentary leaked anonymously online. The final scene showed the abandoned substation, quiet under gray dawn light. Her voice narrated softly: maybe Harrow didn't try to speak to the dead, maybe he built something that lets the world remember itself. As her words faded, the screen filled with static. Then a new image flickered, her camera pointing at an empty chair. A low hum filled the audio track once more. Slowly, subtitles appeared across the static. Memory preserved. Resonance stable. Archive ongoing. And just before the video ended, a faint reflection in the camera lens, a man's outline standing behind her, blurred by motion. The last sound, a single breath, then silence. The quiet. After today, no one can confirm what the Harrow Resonance truly was. Engineers insist it was an acoustic feedback loop amplified by the growth of global networks. Historians call it myth, the digital age's first folklore. But every so often, technicians monitoring the grid still log anomalies, brief bursts of harmonic vibration, identical to the 128.6 Hz frequency, appearing and vanishing without source. The reports always end the same way: tone detected. Duration, 47 seconds, pattern, 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, status, unexplained. And beneath one of the latest reports, scrawled in pen by an unknown hand, someone has added a single line: the machine listens still.